Welcome to Engineering Influence podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. And today we are going back to take a look at some of the research coming out of the ACEC Research Institute, really looking at the quarterly business sentiment reports that they've been putting out since 2022. And what we've done here is we've taken a collection of about 600 executives within the industry, and we've asked them a series of questions on their confidence level, not only on the economy, but their own businesses, the industry, where they actually see markets moving. And we've been collecting these on a quarterly basis for enough time. And we've talked about this a couple of times in past podcasts where we're starting to collect enough data that we can actually analyze it. And we found out that there are some leading indicators. There are some correlations here which are important. And this research is really something that could be used to help forecast economic growth and housing starts and a number of things beyond our industry. And to talk about this and the fact that we now have this track record to be able to look at potential leading indicators, I'm very pleased to be joined by a regular guest on our program, Joe Bates with the ACEC Research Institute. Joe, welcome back onto the program.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy being here with you and appreciate being invited back.
And we always love having you on the show because we really get to take a look at what's happening and the numbers behind our industry and how it's driving the economy. But we've talked and we've mentioned this a couple of times that we have enough data to really start seeing how it relates to other macroeconomic indicators. But now actually we have some hard data that shows that the survey data that we have is actually a leading indicator on some macroeconomic numbers. What have we found?
So this is really, really exciting. When we started this initiative, I said, not only are we going to get a read on how firm leaders feel about the industry, the economy, and various pieces of the industry, various aspects of their business. But I said, we're going to see if this can be used to predict the future, which is what the ACEC Research Institute's mission is to help businesses predict the future. So now that we have 3.5 years of data, Jeff, we're really able to do a lot of work. We initially ran this analysis a little over a year ago, and we found, oh, wow, we actually have some leading indicators here. But we wanted to be more certain, so we waited a while. I've talked about this, but now we actually have the solid graphs that we're ready to publish and provide the industry because it's very clear. Like you see the graphs, we've run the correlations, and 3.5 years of data, it's holding up. So, I'm really excited to be able to talk about this.
It's great that it's finally paying off. And to that point, that is the purpose of the Institute is to take a look at future economic conditions and then kind of look into the future to see exactly where the industry is going. I know that, we can call out 5 positive correlations here that we've noticed in the data. Let's start off with the big number, of course, that is GDP. What have we found in terms of gross domestic product with our survey of industry executives?
Sure. So what we see with GDP is that our overall sentiment regarding the U.S. economy from our firm leaders is a leading indicator of the direction of GDP by 1 quarter. So what that means is, as you know, as most people probably know, GDP has been positive for a very, very long time. So we're not saying that if U.S. sentiment goes down, that GDP turns negative. But what we are saying is that when our sentiment goes down, the strength of GDP is also going down. So directionally, there's a very, very tight correlation. And again, it's a leading indicator of by 1 quarter. And the other piece that's important to know is that we also don't get GDP data for a quarter or so after that quarter ends. So in a way, we're giving firms 2 quarters heads up. Okay, sentiment rose this quarter. So when you hear about the well, let me say it a different way. We're in the first quarter of the year, right? So if U.S. sentiment, the U.S. economic sentiment among firm leaders increases this quarter, and we're currently in the field right now, and we'll have that information in March. So if it increases in our Q1 data, that means that when you hear about Q2 GDP, it's very likely that it will have increased compared to Q1 GDP of this year. And we're coming out with this information in March, but the data from the government is not going to be released until, June or July.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's for firm leaders, and that's for economists. That's for really anyone who's looking at the numbers and trying to figure out what's going to happen, knowing that there's that correlation of saying that at least one quarter of notice that if there is a weakening of sentiment within the engineering industry, then you're going to see some kind of softening in GDP numbers, and vice versa. It's very important to kind of prepare. It's like the Waffle House index with hurricanes, right? It's the idea of like, if the Waffle House is going to stay open, good chance you're going to be okay. If it closes, then get out of Dodge. If you see us kind of weakening our sentiment on a number of factors, it's something to take a look at. There are some others that are also interesting. Let's look at also the correlation between sentiment within the engineering industry and, the construction sector, especially with like housing starts. The same, are we looking at the same kind of correlation here?
Yeah. So obviously GDP, it's the big number, and someone might say, well, what do I do with that? Right. Okay, it's great to know that the economy is going to be doing better, or maybe it's going to slip a little. But when we dive a little bit deeper, we see some of these correlations holding with other metrics that I think are even more impactful for the firms that are in our industry. So as you said, there's a handful. There's housing starts, there's housing permits, and there's total construction. All three of those are also indicated by the U.S. sentiment that we are collecting. So again, the way that we look at this is when we get U.S. sentiment data for Q1 of this year, if it improves, you're very, very likely to see 2 quarters down the road improvement in housing starts, in housing permits, and in total construction as well. So these particular economic metrics are being led by about 2 quarters with our data. So that's an even better, more time in terms of heads up than the US GDP number.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's even more lead time for businesses to prepare and to add and factor that into their future planning. The fact that we have this data now, I mean, is it, what do you want to do with it now? Do you want to see both the quarterly sentiment study, but then also kind of another report, which is kind of an addendum to that report, which kind of focuses on, the behavior of these metrics and the correlations and their impact? How do you want to get this information out?
I think this podcast is a great first step. And so that's why we're doing this podcast first. But I definitely would like to create a short white paper and publish that through the ACEC Research Institute, because I think just talking about it is one thing, but individuals who really want to see the data, I'd like to have that for them, because this is real. We're not just making this up. We're not just trying to toot our own horn. Like, this is real data that has a real impact. And I want people to be able to look at the work we've done and have confidence and say, wow, you know what? I can use this. I can use the U.S. sentiment data from the ACEC Research Institute to help predict what's going to happen in the future and make business decisions on that. And it also helps the media. It helps investors. So this is a tool that I think a lot of people will find useful. So I want to get this out there, and I want people to be able to rely upon it.
Yeah, you raise a really good point there. I mean, there are so many different data points that investors need to know about when they're looking at their portfolios, when the media is taking a look and reporting about the economic situation in the country, trying to look into the crystal ball to figure out exactly where things are going. to have a new reliable indicator that takes a pretty good sizable chunk of the economy. We're talking about things that matter to people when they think about the health of the economy, the housing starts, the construction, what's happening out there, is activity happening in the marketplace, to have a new data point, which is a reliable way to go and kind of discern where the economy is going, is critically important. We talk about the value of the ACEC Research Institute, and we talk about, the importance of it for the industry at large. And I think this kind of goes to that value proposition, the fact that we now have enough data to prove these correlations. What would you say to anybody out there who's looking at this podcast and they're saying, you know what, I haven't been surveyed. I'd love to be surveyed. I mean, how do firms get involved with this project?
So we conduct this survey every quarter, as we talked about, and we pull the list from the membership list of ACEC. So if you're a firm leader, and we define firm leader by title, and to do that, we have used vice president or above. So if you're in your firm, you're a vice president or above, and you're not in the ACEC database, call up ACEC, send us an email, let us know. We'll put you in the database. We'll add you to the survey, and you can start contributing as well. And the other thing I want to mention, Jeff, is I feel like we've only scratched the surface here. There's, as you know, a ton of economic data that the U.S. government puts out. We've only looked at about 10 or 15 metrics, and we found that 5 of them we're leading indicator for. So there's a lot of other things we can do with this. And over time, as we have the time, we're going to try to dive even deeper into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we actually look at the individual quarterly reports, there's a wealth of information there, especially when you get into what market sectors
exactly
seem to be, seeing positive movement versus softening, understanding where the money's going in the economy and where really, because the engineers design on the client's demand, right? So it's that larger idea of where is the money in the economy moving? Where are companies starting to put their money for investing? Are they investing in long-term in construction, data centers, and things that actually, these large, robust pieces of infrastructure and physical plant, how are they doing, how are they moving their money? This is a good way of figuring out exactly, where the growth is going to be. Anyone out there right now in Washington who might come across this podcast as well, when you're looking at policy, the same thing goes with anyone out there who's looking at, prognosticating for an investment portfolio. When you're looking at writing policy on infrastructure investment or exactly, where federal dollars should go, having this data assists in figuring out exactly what the lay of the land is. So really encourage anyone out there in the policy world to really pay attention to this, because these are numbers that matter. And Joe and his team do a fantastic job of aggregating that, not only aggregating it, but also, putting a summary around it that actually makes it very understandable for, anyone of any sophistication. So, Joe, what's next for the Institute here? You have a lot of irons in the fire, I know. Firm of the Future, you guys have the assessments, you just did the new updated kind of economic picture for the industry. What else is on the boilerplate? What else is on the schedule for 2025?
Yeah. So as we've been talking about, we have the business sentiment survey for the first quarter. We'll be releasing that in March, and we'll be conducting it every quarter as we have been for the last 3.5 years. We also recently released the economic data, economic assessment and forecast for our industry back in October. We also have started to conduct a business sentiment survey in Canada. We started that last year. It really was more of let's test this out. Let's see how this works in Canada. And it's going very well. And so we're going to continue that this year. And my hope is that after a few years, we'll also be able to see if our Canadian data is a leading indicator of Canadian economic metrics. We also have the big Firm of the Future initiative that we're embarking upon. We've been working on this for a couple of years, but we are actually going to start conducting the research this year and releasing reports. It's a huge initiative. I know you're working on some of the communication, so there's a lot to come there, and it's going to be big. So I encourage people to stay tuned to that.
Yeah, I really, on the Firm of the Future, go to the ACEC Research homepage, the Institute's homepage, because we're going to be building out a lot of resources with Firm of the Future. The Firm of the Future project is something which I think is really interesting, because you're taking a look at what the firm of 2030, 2035 is going to look like. And you've brought together really an all-star group of individuals who are either executives within the industry or thought leaders in areas that influence the industry to really game out and whiteboard out, what are the big changes that are going to happen, not only from structural side of what the firm could be, but a question of how's AI, how are these technologies impacting how we do our business? What is the staffing going to look like a decade from now? Really gathering all this information. And you've done a lot of the kind of the whiteboarding and you kind of war planned it out so far. So now you're going to start actually digging into the findings and doing some analytical stuff.
That's right. And as you mentioned, the first project is on artificial intelligence. We're going to produce a white paper on that by mid-year, where we talk about here's the history of it, here's what it is, because there's a lot of people who really don't quite know yet what it is. And then we're going to talk about how it's being used and what the future potential uses are. So that I think is going to be very, very useful. And then as you said, the second project is on workforce. We're going to dive into what we all know and are feeling in terms of the challenge of hiring, but we're going to put some numbers and statistics, and we're going to really dive into how can we address this issue in a long-term fashion so that our industry can be sustainable in terms of producing the work that the nation needs us to produce.
Yeah. And anyone out there who is not directly engaged with the industry, tell you we have a shortage of workers. We have a shortage of people. You'll see that in the economic surveys that come out. You have firms that are kind of balancing backlogs. They're turning down profitable work because they don't have the people to do it. They have hiring gaps, and it's not a question of just the competition for talent is fierce, of course, but you have a lot of people who are graduating schools and they're not sticking with our field of engineering, right? And we need to make that more attractive. We're trying to do that at ACEC. We've got an engineering workforce consortium, which we just launched late last year, which brings together a lot of groups within the space. The first time that we've actually kind of brought everybody together under one tent to address the singular issue of workforce. So that's going to be especially now with the immigration debate that's going to be happening with the new Congress, the Trump administration. It's going to be a massive push to really focus in on how do we alleviate the workforce crunch, and then also looking ahead to say what exactly is the pool of talent that we're going to need out there in the future to accomplish this work.
Yeah, absolutely. You really framed up a lot of the issues we're going to talk about, Jeff. So we've got a really exciting year ahead of us. We'll be producing more work than we've ever produced before, and I'm super excited to kick this year off.
Great. Well, Joe, it's going to be a great year. We're going to have you on a lot more to talk about these things as they develop, but really appreciate you coming on the show today to talk about how we have these new leading indicators with the economic data. So really appreciate your time.
It's always a pleasure to be here, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And again, if you watch this show, I'll tell you what, I look at the stats behind the curtain, and I know that we have a lot of people watching across the country, across the world, quite honestly. And it would be a big favor. It takes a second for you to go down there and hit like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to bring this programming to you, keep on getting information out that you don't really get anywhere else. We really focus in on the business of engineering. We look at economic data. We have firm executives come on. We talk about things that are important to the industry and business of engineering. If you want more of that content, like and subscribe to the channel. Kick off the new year on a good footing. And again, this has been Engineering Influence podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies, and we will see you next time.